Peter King, another audience with the King on a Tuesday afternoon. And Peter, Ray is back just to talk to you today. How you doing? Thanks so much for joining us as always.
Everything's good. I had an interesting day. I was over at the NFL meetings where Jim Irsay gave every sports writer in America an absolute jolt of joy, in basically saying we got to get Snyder out of this league. Anyway, yeah. Here we are.
No, and look, we'll get to the 49ers in a second. Everyone knows what happened in Atlanta, but for those who are at work today and don't know what Jim Irsay said, the Colts owner is basically the first NFL owner to say publicly that there is merit to removing Daniel Snyder. I believe that that's the direct quote. And as far as I'm concerned, Peter, he's like the perfect guy to deliver this message because he doesn't hold a great deal of NFL owner gravity, but fans love him, and all of his flaws are completely on the record. Like, unless he's got bodies buried and things we don't know about that are business dealings, him and his struggles with prescription medicine and DUI, like Jim Irsay is flawed enough to get out ahead of this story and I think have it land pretty well with the public.
And look, he even said that today. He said, I don't care what, because obviously there are these significant rumors that that Daniel Snyder has asked for all the owners in the NFL who have skeletons in their closet, or has asked his attorneys to look into these owners, has asked his attorneys to look into Roger Goodell, all that stuff, which he fervently denied, absolutely fervently denied in a statement after the meetings today. But look, I think the biggest thing in here is that someone has chosen right now, someone in the NFL, one of the 32, one of the 31 really, has chosen to break ranks. And I don't think he did this at the behest of Roger Goodell or at the behest of a cabal of owners. I think he did it because he's like so many owners in the NFL. He is sick of an owner who over and over and over again diminishes the value of a not only once proud franchise, but 25 years ago, this was a top 5 franchise in the National Football League. And I can tell you, I covered the NFC East for 4 years in the 80s. I went to 15 games at RFK Stadium. And there was no place like RFK Stadium. I'm talking about no place. And by that, I mean that when a game got exciting, when a game got heated, you'd be up in the press box, which, like hung over the side of the upper deck. And you'd be in the press box, and you'd be shaking to the point where you had to hold on to the table in front of you. Okay, and that has just been diminished to the point where now this franchise is excited if they sell out their stadium and 2/3 of the fans are for the Philadelphia Eagles or the Dallas Cowboys. It's disgusting. It's shameful. And all these people who their whole lives had worshipped Joe Gibbs and Joe Theismann and Bobby Beathard and everything, they don't pay attention to this team anymore. They don't care. This owner has to be removed. He just does. And whether he does it voluntarily or the NFL does. And let me tell you one other thing. The way the owners in this league think. You know what they think? This is a jewel franchise. And every year he tarnishes the jewel more. He makes it worth less money. At the bottom line, the guys who own franchises in the NFL, they're concerned about the value of their franchises. And every year that Daniel Snyder owns this team, the value of their franchises is diminished by how horrible, the value of this franchise is. Anyway, Just a couple of thoughts.
Okay, yeah. As a practical and political matter, not as a right or wrong matter, why Irsay and why not somebody else? Other than the notion
Because
that...
I talked to Ray.
Yeah.
Hey, Ray. I talked to somebody who said, we didn't know this was coming. Now, maybe some people did know it was coming. But the guy I talked to after this happened had no idea that this was happening. And I'm not sure that, first of all, even though there was an NFL PR person standing next to him while this happened, I'm not sure that this is what the NFL wanted. Yeah, I think there's a lot of owners who don't mind it, but I also think there is a little bit of, the honor code where we don't go outside the family, But again, who knows? I don't think that's the important part of it. I think the important part of it is that one of the people in this club, in the most exclusive club in American sports history, one of the people violated the code that says you don't go against the family, and Jim Irsay did, and good for him.
Is this an indication in your mind that there are close to enough votes to make this happen?
I don't think there are yet, Ray. I don't think there are yet. I think they want to wait to see what the investigation by Mary Jo White into the culture that Daniel Snyder hath wrought with this team. But I do think there's a lot of people who realize that he's ruining the value of one of the crown jewel franchises of the league. So, again, I would just say everybody in the NFL, I can't think of 5 people in any position of authority who want Daniel Snyder to continue as owner. And everybody wants him out, but until they have some real meat on the bone to get him out, he's not going anywhere.
Peter King, here on 95.7 The Game. He opened with the fact that he was at the NFL owners meeting today. That's how we started the conversation, but I think most people around here aren't concerned with the Commanders, their future, or their owner at all. What they're wondering about, Peter, is why Kyle Shanahan decided to run a whistling through the graveyard 8-minute, 16-play drive that ended on downs, that didn't feature a no-huddle, down 14 points. He chewed clock like he was up 3 touchdowns, and it just didn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see it. Obviously, I read about it, and it does seem like, at best, a quirky decision, at best. However, I think the overriding thought I had at the end of this game was that a team that has a team that is playing a very physical team, like the Atlanta Falcons have become under Arthur Smith, team that plays a physical team and is without, I think, isn't it 11 starters on IR? And 4 other starters who didn't play in the game, who aren't on IR, but they were too hurt to play. I mean, this struck me as not an impossible game to win, but a difficult game to win. And a coaching decision which seems dubious, and I agree with you. I don't know that that's the thing I'd be focusing on, but again, I have to admit, I was in Kansas City. I watched only snippets of that game, so I'm probably a bad person to say, horrible this, horrible that. I just will say that this was, to me, a game that was going to be very difficult for this team to win.
Well, then, out of specifics, kind of an overall arcing theme, I think, is that the 49ers offense doesn't quite equal the sum of its parts. And in year 6, that's all on Kyle. He's got more continuity in his locker room, even with the injuries, than most coaches are ever afforded in a single year of a 6-year run. And Kyle's had this now for years. And it seems like it's way too deep into the Shanahan experiment to be 19th in total offense, 19th in scoring offense, and being rendered scoreless in second half after second half. In 5 of their 6 games this year, you remove Carolina, they've scored 19 total points in the second half. And at what point does that land on Shanahan's desk?
I guess I would also say that they played on Sunday with an offensive line that started 4 players who are not household names in their own household.
0 sacks. Jimmy had 0 sacks.
Brendel Burford.
Yeah. But they didn't didn't play poorly. I mean, they really didn't. Brendel had some really bad penalties on that drive that we were talking about. But, I mean, Jimmy had no sacks. He had a lot of time. I mean, he was a victim of drops more than he was poor protection.
But also, I think you have to look at, okay, so if that's a good offensive line, you're going to do what the Falcons did on their side of the ball. You're going to run it a lot. They ran it for whatever, I forget, 150, 160 yards. 49ers ran for 50 yards. Now, maybe they should have tried to run more, but obviously they weren't getting much done, in the running game. There are 2 running backs in this game. Wilson and Coleman ran for 28 yards. And again, I did not watch the game, so I can't speak to that. But the one thing I can say is that if you have an offensive line of mostly backups playing in the game, or I should say guys who you would have considered backups on the first day of training camp, okay, it's going to be tough to play a very physical defensive front, okay, as Atlanta has, and to try to dominate that front. And so that's kind of what I saw. And really, I have to say, that little 12 or 13 minute highlight thing that is on YouTube of every NFL game.
Yeah.
About an hour or so ago, I watched that of this game. So I mean, that's because I knew we were going to be talking about the game, obviously. So I just didn't see enough to know whether there are darts to be thrown at the game plan or whatever.
Well, in that regard, let me just ask one other broader question. Since we've, I've talked about what Kyle hasn't done. How much credit in your mind does Shanahan deserve for consistently having a great defense?
Well, I mean, I think what was interesting about this game the other day, I mean, you think of all of the guys who were unavailable in this game. And it's not just Armstead, Bosa. I mean, look at all the injuries they have on defense. And so I would say, with the exception of Ebukam, that it's likely that they started 3 guys on the defensive line who would, in an ideal world, would not have been starting in this game. And I think if a team is going to run a lot against you and run well, then that's got to be considered. But I also think that when you look at the depth of a team, and again, I think that one of the things that Shanahan and Lynch and Adam Peters deserve credit for is that they haven't always agreed on everything. Going back to that first draft, they haven't always agreed on everything. But they come out of both the draft and the setting of the roster as a united front. And I only mention that because that's not entirely common in the NFL. You can probably figure that. But I just think that the depth they have on their 53-man roster allows them to be competitive when they're down quite literally 15 starters going into a road game against a team that looks like it might be pretty good.
What do you make of the notion that even with their profound inconsistencies, they're in no worse shape playoff-wise than they were before they played Atlanta. And does this look to you like a conference in which one, maybe two teams might be excellent, and everybody else is going to be in that morass till the end?
Look, we got 11 games to go, Ray, but right now, I think there's only one team that's excellent, and that's Philadelphia. Minnesota is 5-1, but their strength of victory, among the 7 NFC playoff teams right now, there's only one, and that's the Rams, that's worse than the Vikings. Kirk Cousins has been just okay. I don't know how good Minnesota is. I really don't. So I think there's only one superior team. I might right now say that the New York Giants are more dangerous than the Minnesota Vikings. But if you look at the NFC West right now, I cannot imagine that the Rams are going to be able to make the playoffs. I mean, I find it hard knowing what they are right now to believe they're 3-3. Seattle might be better than the Rams. We can sit here and say that the Cardinals are going to be an absolute dumpster fire the rest of the year, because I think they will be. But as crazy as this sounds, it just might come down to San Francisco and Seattle in this division. But again, I think the 49ers are fortunate, to be in a division where there's no other team. The 49ers are flawed because they're incredibly injured right now. But you look at the other two teams. I'm just not going to consider Arizona. But you look at the Rams in Seattle, and they're also flawed. I think, as crazy as it sounds, first year post Russell Wilson, Seattle might be the least flawed team in the division. I'm not saying that they are, but they might be.
Peter King on Damon and Ratto. So one of the formulas that I think the 49ers are going to be leaning on is the fact that, basically the league is 3-3 around them. The division is mostly 3-3 around them. And they only have 3 true road games remaining, with a game waiting for them in Mexico City. They've got 7 home games left. And if they just go 6-1 in those 7 home games remaining, that's 9 wins right there, and then we'll see what they do on the road. That one, I think, gets dialed up, though, this weekend. Kansas City is coming to town, licking its wounds after a home loss to the Buffalo Bills. I would imagine Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are coming into Levi's Stadium to just unleash hell.
Well, I don't think, I was at that game in Kansas City. And look, with 1 minute to go in that game, they were ahead. And, Josh Allen made the throw of the year in the NFL. He threw it about 3 inches above leaping safety. And Dawson Knox's tight end was blanket covered by Justin Reed, and somehow, some way, he came down with the ball. That's just the most incredible throw of this year. But anyway, be that as it may, it's not like Buffalo came in, and even though everything that Kansas City tried to do was a chore on Sunday, nothing was easy. It's not like Buffalo came in and just wiped the floor with them. So I think Kansas City's pretty good. And this is a bad time for the 49ers to be playing them. It just is. There's no question about it. But I think the other point that you make, you're absolutely right. If you look at the way that the 49ers schedule lays for the rest of the year, I look at this schedule right now. So a lot of things before the start of the year, you would say, boy, they got the Bucs in December and blah, 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 blah. There is not one game on this schedule after they play Kansas City this weekend where I'd bet against the 49ers. I'm not saying they're going to win them all, but they are going to be in every one of those games for the rest of the year, 10 of the last 11 games, even if they lose this game against Kansas City by 10. And again, look, it's at Levi's. You don't know. Football's a funny game. I think Kansas City ought to win the game, but hey, we'll see.
Is there anything to your mind that suggests that the 49ers' defensive injury problems are going to be chronic, or did they all look like, this is just 1 week, they'll get back sooner or later? Or are you seeing a sign that maybe this is something they're going to have to struggle with throughout a lot of those easy games that you cite?
Do you remember 2 years ago when they had that bizarre game against the Jets where everybody got hurt on the turf at the Meadowlands?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And then they went to West Virginia. They licked their wounds. They were hugely pissed off at the condition of that field. And the NFL sent somebody out to check the field and all this. It was kind of a big to-do. And then they came out the next week, after having been absolutely devastated by injuries, and they beat the Giants by 300 points. And so, I think football is a really, really emotional game, and that about 2 or 3 days after you have time to take a deep breath, sleep in your own bed a couple of days, the 49ers will go into work tomorrow for the first full day of the week, and they'll go into work tomorrow, and they'll just say, okay, let's go. What's the game plan against Kansas City? I don't think that they're going to have a hangover from this game against Atlanta. Now, they don't want to get beat 33-10 against Kansas City, but I just feel like there's a reason why these seasons really go back and forth and kind of go crazy each year. And it's because different things buffet your team depending when you play them, And so right now the 49ers are totally beat up, and you'd wish that you got them in week 15 instead of week 7. But that's just the way the schedule falls. I wouldn't be that concerned if they lost decisively to Kansas City.
Peter King, the last thing we see is still, among the first things on our mind, and the flop landing of Russell Wilson in Denver is really something else, considering how great he had always looked against the 49ers specifically. There is a huge disconnect in Denver. Who is more responsible for Russell Wilson's career, either looking good or looking bad? Do you think Nathaniel Hackett has brought out the worst in him, or did Pete Carroll, God bless the old codger, just know how to restrict him and bring out the best in him? And this is maybe what it looks like when you let Russ eat, if you will. I can't believe what a failure to launch the Denver Broncos are.
So, coming into this year, Russell Wilson had played 10 years in the NFL, and his lifetime completion percentage was 65. He was in the top 5 or 6 in NFL history in passer rating, which not a lot of people love the passer rating stat, but it is a little bit of a measuring stick that you can compare quarterback to quarterback over the years. But even if you don't care about that, all right, even if you just don't care, the one thing that really strikes me about Russell Wilson is how indecisive he is. Just, I think we watched the game last night and we saw how Russell Wilson hit that, that rookie tight end, Greg Dulcich, for the touchdown, 39-yard touchdown early. And we say, okay, he's coming back. But what was it about that 39-yard touchdown that was most interesting? In my opinion, the fact that nobody covered him. You and I, not Ray, all right? But you and I, Damon, could have thrown that touchdown pass. And I'm saying that what really hit me, then watching how horrible the offense was the rest of the day, is that we kind of got deluded by the fact they put up 10 points on their first couple of possessions, because it's easy to score a touchdown when the other team doesn't cover the receiver. And I would be worried now that the head coach of this team doesn't have a solution when crisis hits. And, right now, obviously, they are in a crisis. They're in a free fall. And they have played 6 games. Russell Wilson has thrown 5 touchdown passes, and he's on pace to throw half the number of touchdown passes that he had in his average year in Seattle. And I don't think that anything really is going to become a Russell Wilson. He will come back in the off season. He'll work his rear end off after this debacle to make sure it never happens again. But my gut feeling is that he's probably going to have a new coach to do it with.
When you return from Kansas City, how well fed are you?
That is one of the great eating places in the United States.
It sure is.
And I'll tell you what I did on Saturday night. I found a place. I was staying in this place in Kansas City called Country Club Plaza. It's a nice neighborhood. Andy Reid lives there. Dick Vermeil used to live there when he was the coach. And it's where a lot of the upper crust lives. And the reason I love that is because there's 4 or 5 restaurants that you get closed out of one, you just go into another. And it was such an insane time in Kansas City that every restaurant was full. So I had to eat at the bar with 2 TVs, and I watched the end of Alabama, Tennessee, and I watched maybe inning 6 through 13 of that bizarre Seattle-Houston game. And the food was unbelievable, and everything about the atmosphere was unbelievable. Even the chant of, land of the free and home of the Chiefs, which they say all the time. So anyway, that's a fun place to go watch football. And I'll tell you, when it's 64 degrees, not a cloud in the sky, and a light breeze wafting in from the east, and you play a football game in that, and no one takes their seat for the entire game, it's just like a British soccer crowd. That was an incredible experience.
Arrowhead indeed does it right. Peter, so do you. Thank you so very much for joining us as always.
Okay, all the best, guys. Thank you.
There he is. Peter King, well fed in Kansas City.